right, everybody, this is Thomas with the next episode of the KAAMP, that is the Knoxville Area Artist Networking Podcast platform. The P is interchangeable. Today, I'm sitting here with someone whose work was recommended to me by Carl Gumbert, and I am happy to finally sit down and have this conversation. Sir, will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Jered Sprecher.
And what kind of work do you do?
I am a painter, artist, and the work that I do is really taking images from nature, like flowers, trees, plants, sunsets, things like that, and rocks and gems, and then using a sort of lens of technology to abstract those in the paintings. And so there's a sort of element of realism in the painting, but there's also a lot of abstraction.
Can you elaborate on the lens?
Oh yeah, the lens of technology. So, there's so many things that we're used to. We've become accustomed to looking at JPEGs, which some are high quality, some are very low quality, but also like in many ways our eye and how we see the world has been transformed by our cell phone cameras. And just even the lens of a camera, but also scanners and things like that. So even the colors we sort of perceive in our surroundings and just the digital artifacts that surround us. So I'm always looking for those things and letting them creep into the space of painting as I'm working on a painting.
Digital artifacts. I'm familiar with those because I've got video editing and rendering experience. So what about those generally unwanted things do you enjoy?
So I think, and this is like a long-term interest in my work, there's always been a play between things that are becoming sort of decayed or degraded, almost like composting, and then as those things sort of turn around and become a new thing. And so there's a sort of becoming and unbecoming that I think is a sort of central, like, underlying river to what I do as an artist.
That's awesome.
Cool.
But you recognize the cyclical nature of the creation and destruction of the digital aspect of it.
Oh yeah. At some point I heard somebody talking about, it's like every time you close an image or every time you turn off your computer, turn it back on, it sort of dies a little bit. You're losing memory, and there's always a chance that some of those ones and zeros get misplaced. And the same way with us, cells transfer over time, and our body's always changing. We're not the same person we were 10 years ago.
Truth. Some people would say you've got a whole new volume of blood, and your bones restore themselves every 7 years or something like that. So that cyclical nature of things, and you find that in the digital aspect of your creations.
Oh yeah, totally.
And do you find those out and about as inspirational items, or is that just a thing that you find in your work? A mentor of mine, John Dilg, he would always talk about being in the studio, but it wasn't necessarily the physical place. But it's a sort of mindset that you take with you. And so whether, I'm walking around Knoxville or visiting a place like New York, I'm always on the lookout, like where's the weed popping through the, asphalt, like a thistle or something like that. Or is it like a digital advertisement, but like it got smashed by something and its output is just all scrambled. And so like there's a sort of life and death sort of beauty aspect to those things. Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Yeah.
Carl also spoke about being in one's studio in our conversation about it being a metaphorical space at times when you can't physically be in the space.
Oh, yeah.
And I was happy to hear you put that into words. I was happy to hear him put that into words, because that's a thought process that I've had for a while now that serves me really well.
Yeah.
It's always, being mindful of your creative eye, whether you're in the space or not, being aware of your own creativity when you can is
it can be inspiring. It's a double-edged sword. There's a whole lot of ways that could go.
Yeah, and some people are really good at quantifying that and sort of physically manifesting it. Like you see people and they just have gorgeous sketchbooks filled with like notes or drawings or collages, whatever it may be. And there's also the people who have their camera with them all the time, or they're recording notes on their cell phone. And, that recording aspect is really good. So you can come back to those ideas. But yeah, just the idea of like having your eyes open, your ears open, and looking and listening all the time.
What's the notepad in your phone look like?
I'm not really good at I'll send emails to myself sometimes. The other thing that I'll do, it's just like lots of photos.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like the photo of a book cover because I want to read the book.
Right.
Sometimes it's a book cover because there's something about the illustration on the cover. Or just the idea there. So there's a lot of notes to self, but they're in a quick sort of snapshot version. So.
Well, since for the spirit of full disclosure, mine is a bunch of very scattered brain notes and hand-drawn sketches because I have that functionality in my notepad. And that's usually where a lot of verbiage and text prompts end up from the images that cross my mind. So I'll jot down words that associate if I can't just draw it with my finger. And it's just a jumbled mess. But I do it in such a way that I know in the future I can come back and try my best to get the image that I try to put down.
It's funny. My studio sketchbook practice has the appearance of organization, but at any time there's like 7 to 10 sketchbooks going because I'll sort of misplace one or leave it somewhere, and then I pick up another one, and so it's like a leapfrog of chronology and ideas.
Do you ever date any of your sketches and keep track of that?
I try to, but it's not like draw it and then date it and sign it or anything like that. Usually it's sort of draw it, leave it half finished and come back to it 10 years later.
I'll put a month, but I never put a day. If I remember to date it with the full date, it's doomed somehow. So if I just put like February 2022, it's like all right, I can deal with that.
Yeah, if I can get month and year, that's high accomplishment.
Yeah, I've cataloged it pretty well at that point. So this is where you're at now. Can we talk about some of the things you did on your way here, the metaphorical here? So what was the first thing you remember being creative about?
First thing I remember being creative about.
That usually gives people a chin scratch or two.
Yeah, I mean, it's more... There's lots of different things I think I could point to, and I felt like my parents were very. It wasn't their like shoved paint into my hands and said go make something.
Yeah.
But there was like a permissiveness or just sort of opportunity, and also the ability to be bored.
Very important.
And it's like when you're bored, then like your mind starts wandering. Mm-hmm. At one point this is more recently, maybe about 5 years ago, I was talking with my dad, and he grew up on a farm in Iowa, and he said, there would be days where he would just be like driving the tractor all day long.
Yeah.
And this is before like nice new tractors with air conditioning and radio and stuff like that. And so he's just like lots of time to think and plan and roll over ideas. So I think, just as a kid, like I had that space to like read, to take in things and then try and make things. A fond memory that I have is we lived in Houston, Texas from basically the ages when I was like 6 to 11. And at some point my parents had like some flat cardboard and like some weird olive yarn that somehow had like come into the family. It was the 80s, so I'm sure everything.
There's an explanation for the color.
Everything is olive colored, and avocado and all that. And then some macaroni and some Elmer's glue, and I started making these like, probably like they felt huge to me. They were probably like 3 foot by 4 foot, like collages of dinosaurs, just using macaroni.
That sounds like a lot of macaroni.
And I just remember being totally enamored with that experience. My mom was like letting me take up the space in the kitchen, the major thoroughfare of the house.
Right.
And it wasn't just one. I think I made several of them. But, like, there was always the opportunity to draw and make things. And it didn't seem anything special or out of the ordinary. It's just like something you could do.
Yeah. And is that the earliest? Or it's just the one that's easiest for you to recall?
I think there's earlier memories of just like the feeling of like finger paint, like its sort of coolness and its smell and like the gliding across the paper. And then I love to like build structures with my, like wooden building blocks, like these things were around.
Yeah.
Or even my dad would let me like play with some of like the tools, and so I build like coat hangers out of like scrap woods and stuff like that. So yeah, just ability to make stuff.
So you had that space in the home?
Yeah, and it was allowed and encouraged. Yeah, so it was a good experience that way.
Glad to hear that. So what was next? Any like high school shenanigans art class? Any college art education, formal art education?
Yeah. Okay. Keep me on track here.
This may meander as much as the Tennessee River, and that's fine with me. All right,
that's good. When I was in high school, I think, my freshman year, it's a lot of your basic classes. And, I was taking whatever, the history class and English and math and all that. And when I had a chance to sign up for some electives my sophomore year of high school, my mom was like, "Jered, you always like to draw. Why don't you take an art class?" I was like, "Mom, I don't have to. I'm a serious student. I don't have time for this." As a sophomore,
very serious,
a wise fool that I was. And so I signed up for like the basic art class with Mrs. Bolton at Shawnee Mission South High School.
Shout out.
Yeah, and I was hooked after that class. Like we did some like drawing exercises, and like designed a CD cover. Just like some made some like comic strips. She sort of like gave us a sort of range of experience, and then maybe my junior year I took a photography class. And then my senior year, it's like any like time I could get in the art room, I would. I was still taking like those other classes high school wise and really enjoyed them. But I just felt it was like the tractor beam of art was pulling me in. After that, I went to a small college in Nebraska, Concordia. It was 1,200 students, something like that. But it was really fortunate that the art faculty there, they were amazing artists, and they were really dedicated to teaching, and they just put a lot of sweat equity into the program. Like they did some of the remodeling of the building, right before I arrived there, and it just was like a really cared for place, and they made us work hard. And I have fond memories of being up late at night working on drawings or, stuff for a 2D design class or paintings, being into the building until late at night, and just working away. So after that, the fool that I am, I was like, I'm going to go on to graduate school. Because at that point I decided, all right, I want to be an artist. How do I, sustain myself? And, my professors at Concordia were such like good role models. I was like, maybe I want a job like theirs. And so, the MFA is the way to go for that. And so I applied to 7-8 schools and was able to get admission to the University of Iowa. And so 3 months after graduating from undergrad, I headed off to graduate school at the University of Iowa and worked with really amazing faculty there. John Dilg, who I mentioned before, Laurel Farron, Susan Chrysler White, Chelsea Verna, David Dunlap, Sue Hetmansberger, just
really, really amazing artists there. And then I was in a really good cohort. I'm still friends and connected to a lot of the artists who were there at the same time with me. And so even though we're not necessarily geographically close, I've been able to stay in contact with them, and know what they're doing. Some are still making art, some are making furniture, but they're all like, doing creative things.
That's excellent.
Yeah, good, real good folks.
Yeah, it's good when you can keep those healthy co-collaborative relationships going.
Oh yeah.
The ones I have drive me really hard. Like, I have friends in art all over the country, and I'll send pictures of this, pictures of that. What do you think? What are you working on? And those conversations are always fruitful.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate them. In fact, I was able to get together with some friends who are down in Atlanta a couple weeks ago, and it's 20 years since graduate school, but it was like no time had passed.
Right. Conversation rolled.
Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. So what kind of work were you doing in that time period?
Okay. In that, so sort of graduate school and heading out of graduate school. In graduate school, there was a major change that happened, as there should be in graduate school. I went into graduate school and I was making drawings that had to do. I would go visit nursing homes, and I would visit with the residents at the nursing home, and I would draw them. So I had permission. I would go 2 or 3 times a week, and at one point during one of those visits, there was a resident there. Her name was Esther. And she was watching me draw really intently, and I needed to take a break. I'd been sitting on the floor for a long time and just needed to get up and stretch. And so I said, Esther, would you like to draw? And she took the paper and she made these 2 circles sort of interlocked, and then another pair of circles that were interlocked. And then she drew a little sort of square rectangle around them, and I was like, what is this drawing? And she pointed at her face and said, that's me. So she was pointing at her eyeglasses
on top of her eyes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
They sort of like 2 eyes, or 4 eyes, as they would say on the playground.
Right.
And that sort of stopped me in my tracks. I was like, it's not the sort of normal drawing that you see people just sort of pull out of their pocket.
Insanely abstract when you were there doing still life stuff.
Yeah, I was drawing portraits. And she picked up the pencil again, and she made these parallel lines, maybe about 3 inches long, just sort of, just a little bit spaced apart from each other, and then drew another box or a square around those lines. And then she reached to her side in a wheelchair, and she said, that's the book I'm reading. And she, picked up a book. And so she had drawn this like pictogram of a page of type. So Esther, she was really sort of flooring me here with these images she was coming up with. She picked up the pencil again and sort of started these sort of jagged back and forth lines about 4 inches across, back and forth on the page. And she said, that's me exercising. And I had been in the nursing home and I had seen exercise time,
right.
And it was like arm circles and things like that, just sort of general movement. And so it's not like at that moment, what my art making changed, but it made me think about the sort of possibilities of what I was doing in painting and drawing. And there was like a real directness and humility and even sort of humor in these drawings that Esther was making. And it gave me something to really like struggle with.
Yeah.
Like here I was making these portraits. What did these portraits mean? And over the course of that next summer, which I was now in graduate school, I sort of set aside the portrait drawing project at the nursing home, and was just
sort of forcing myself to make paintings, but paintings that were sort of simple in their mode, like what Esther was doing. So it might be about a line or a relationship of two colors. And so I was looking for these like visual artifacts that I might find, in the world around me, or an art history text or something like that.
So did that interaction with Esther really push you to do and see more abstract?
I think it opened up the world for me to think. I think at that point I thought, I don't know if I can really make an abstract painting.
Were you being too literal with your work?
I think it was maybe just a sort of allowing a little bit more grace or sort of openness for the possibilities, and maybe even in sort of awareness. Like there was something about Esther's drawing that it reminded me of the trimmer of my grandma's hand when she would write her name. She had beautiful penmanship, and she lived with my parents near the end of her life. So this beautiful penmanship, but when you looked at those lines, you could see that slight tremor just of age in there. And so there's that sort of grace, but that vulnerability at the same time. And I think it sort of helped open my eyes or take some of the scales off my eyes into there can be a lot of information and a lot of emotional weight in a very small sliver of something.
Oh, definitely.
And so, like how a quilt is stitched, there's a lot of information there just in how it's held together.
That's a good analogy too.
Or like how in focus or out of focus that photograph is. And so I think at that point it helped me sort of zero in on those bits of information and the possibility of like the sort of yearning or longing that they can carry with them. So throughout the sort of rest of graduate school, I think that was a big push for me. But I also had the space to do like some performances and installations and stuff like that. So it was a time of for me, just a really great time of experimentation. And then, grad school ends, you're trying to figure out what's the next chapter, where am I headed? I had applied for a bunch of teaching jobs and residencies, nothing lined up. So Christine, my wife, and I, we were still there in Iowa City for another year. And I worked at the University of Iowa hospitals. They have a thing called Project Art. And so I'd be sort of moving art around in the hospital and sort of, it was a way to sort of beautify this place. And over the course of that year, I applied for a bunch of other stuff. And sometime late spring, I got a call from this foundation based in New York City. It's called the Murray Walsh Sharp Foundation. Now it's the Sharp Willentis Foundation. But they offer free studios to, at that point, I think it was 14 artists for a year in New York City. And I had been awarded one of those. So it was like a sort of kick in the butt from the universe. Like, all right, you applied for this thing.
Go do it now.
You've got this gift of this year of a rent-free studio in New York, which is no small gift.
Right.
So you need to go there, and you need to make some art, and you need
take
to
full advantage.
Meet some people. So that was a good push out the door of Iowa City, and go experience another part of the world.
Yeah, it sounds like a drastic transition that was a really good catalyst.
Oh yeah, I was sort of like a boy from the Midwest, and so even just the idea of wandering around New York City seemed pretty daunting.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't trade my time in New York City for anything.
Oh, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
I would imagine. And what'd you make in the studio that year?
I had this nice big studio. It was maybe 500 plus square feet. And I made lots of paintings. They were pretty big in size. And they continued this sort of idea of like using those sort of small slices or artifacts. And at this point, I feel like I had sort of had a little bit more grasp about it. And I started thinking of it as the handwriting of humankind. So I would look for, several thousand-year-old like cave drawings. But I'd also look in the corner of a Renaissance painting, or maybe I'd find a Polaroid, that fell out of a book. And there would be little shadows, shapes, graffiti, things like that. And I would pull them into my paintings because I felt like something about that image or mark or shape had a sort of yearning to it. And I almost wanted it to be like if you had the secret decoder ring, then you would understand it.
Yeah, from the Cracker Jack box.
Yeah, yeah. But but that the viewer would sense that there is some sort of intention in that painting, that there's some sort of mystery in that painting, and that they'd want to spend time with it, trying to unlock that thing. And so, I think my sort of larger umbrella thought with this idea of the handwriting of humankind was that we're always trying to like reach out to other people and trying to connect to people.
Yep.
So if you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and you see a Dutch still life painting or a portrait painting from the 1900s, it's especially that portrait painting, it's a way of saying here's this person. This is how they looked at this moment in time. They will age, they will die, but here they are in this moment. Or you'd see graffiti on the side of a subway car, and it's a way for somebody saying, here I am, here's my name, I exist in this world. And so it's a way of sort of letting people know that we're here, that we have needs, that we have loves, desires. And so I was trying to take that energy back into the studio and into the paintings, and find a poetic way to embed it into those things I was making.
So when you say these paintings were big, how big were they? Because you work on a pretty large scale a lot of the time.
They're not as large as the most recent ones. We're talking like 5-6 feet across, maybe even getting to 7 feet. And then there were smaller ones, 3 foot by 4 foot and 20 by 16 inches. And I'm also really thoughtful of how the size of a painting or a drawing affects it. And so you might, like a small painting, say it's like 16 by 12 inches or even smaller, like the size of a piece of paper, like 8.5 by 11. Like that's an intimate scale.
Because you have to be close.
You have to be close. It's the size of like maybe like a book page, like you might read, sort of close to your face or on your lap, or 8.5 by 11. It's also roughly about the size of the mask of a person's face. And so there's that sort of like nice intimate relationship. Once you get large, a painting that's 6 foot across, it's like wingspan. It's sort of like you have to reach out that far. It's sort of reaching out to envelop you, but you also have to stand further back from it to take in the whole thing. So there's this sort of innate information about how you're going to bodily relate to that object that's there, whether it's that intimate scale or if it's that larger scale that even becomes hard to take in, once you get within 10 feet of it.
So do you enjoy that physical relationship with the larger pieces?
Oh, yeah. Like, there's an opportunity to be immersive, to scan, to get up close to discover things, to stand back and see how the relationships shift. I think probably the biggest, strength or weakness is that, as things get larger like that, it can veer into sort of like a spectacle, or like a flexing moment. And I don't want my paintings to be like necessarily a spectacle or like a flexing moment. I want them to have impact for the viewer, and I want it to be a meaningful experience, and I want their imagination to be activated.
But it doesn't have to be grandiose.
Yeah,
like there's no
it's,
pretext.
You know, it is not like a Michael Bay Transformers movie.
Lens flare everywhere.
Yeah, you know, or like what is it, the second Matrix movie? It's like I feel like half the movie is just an abstract, you know, expressionist painting in motion. You know, there's action going on, but you have no idea what the action is.
Yeah. So, what do you do? Any smaller pieces?
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays?
Yeah. I've got a ton of these like 16 by 12 inch paintings that I work on. They're oil on paper, and oftentimes they start as me like cleaning off my brush and palette knives at the end of the day, and I'll just keep doing that. And seems to be at some point where it's like dabbing my brush, cleaning it off in there, that there's something of interest begins to happen. Like there's some unexpected colors next to each other, that come from a couple different paintings, the DNA from a couple different paintings.
And then they're just there because you were absentmindedly cleaning your brush or whatever.
So there's some sort of, seems like seemingly like unconscious sort of things happening, relationships happening. And, you know, sometimes I might just begin to see a form or shape in there, and then begin to sort of pull on it and nudge it and sort of move the paint around to develop that. Other times I might sort of have an image from from the photos I've taken and things I've torn out of magazines and stuff like that. That I will say, oh, what if I like take that element or that flower or that digital artifact and bring it into this, it's the compost heap of painting is really what those small paintings are. So for me, they're like a really important space and opportunity. There's a lot of improvisation or unexpected things that happens in them.
Is that the flip side to the intention of your larger pieces?
Yeah, I mean, by nature, the larger paintings, you've got to plan a little bit more, or else you're just wasting a lot of material and also a lot of time. But those small paintings, they also inform the larger ones. You're like, okay, like this thing happened. How do I create? The smear of paint may be like 5 inches on that small scale. How do I create like a 3-foot wide smear of paint
in the same shape or
a transparent skin of paint that covers a 4-foot, square area of the painting.
So also thought exercises for practical reasons.
Oh yeah,
on the small scale.
Oh yeah,
excellent. Yeah. And that being a practice space means that you have safety to screw it up.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's like failure is not a bad thing.
No,
you need failure in the studio. If you're not failing, you're not trying. So
true that. So I'm going to ask you a question I've actually forgot to ask the last couple of guests I've had, and I just realized that today while I was in the shower. I was like, I haven't asked this question in ages. Do you have any influences on your creative output that you see in your creative output? Like, do you see any of any interests you have distilled into your work?
So is that open? Is that art influences?
No, it's across the board. Like it could be, the tree you saw on your way drive to the post office.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be. This is a general life to art question, not specific art context question.
Yeah. It's funny that you say tree on the way to the post office.
Did that happen?
Well, it may happen more than once. Just, we go visit my parents and my wife's parents in the Midwest. And anytime we're driving, around Knoxville, it's like I always have my eyes open, and I'm looking at the sculptural form of trees. And like sort of the story that they tell. Did they grow around something? Did somebody like perform like some sort of massive like cut back on it?
Did something grow into the tree?
Yeah, did it split in a windstorm? And there's just like a lot of evocative formal elements, what to use an art term, that are descriptive of sort of a history. And so you have to sort of like read into it, like, whoa, like that thing was broken 15 years ago. But now it's sort of regrown, or, you know, that half of that tree is dying, half of that tree seems to be doing appears to be doing well. What's the story behind that? And so that, you know, of course, like there's beautiful branching forms and stuff like that. So that's a sort of like the studio's with you everywhere type of moment. And so I'm always looking for those. So my experience gardening as a kid, you know, was like mowing the lawn, and then, you know, like picking green beans in the heart of this, or the heat of the summer. But at our house here in Knoxville, you know, we've been able to do some gardening, you know, first, you know, plant a tree, or, you know, some Lenten roses or something like that. But it's just like the experience of, you may have plans in your yard, and they don't always work out. You plant something, it dies. You know, it's a constant sort of tending, and you're not in control of it as much as you think you are. So you have to let go of things, or like concentrate your efforts in one area. And so I think that's taught me some life lessons, life lessons for the studio, but also just sort of like other life lessons of like, all right, you know, parenting, sometimes you have to like let the kids go. Sometimes you have to, you know, be there ready to catch them. You know, the same thing with working with students and things like that.
So on that tree with organic forms, there's a tree that I drive by every now and again that is shaped like a pickle, and it's been trimmed around some power lines. So the arch, you know, the classic cartoony just pickle, it looks exactly like that. And every time I see it, I drive by and I was like, that damn pickle tree. And it's one of those things that I can't get out of my head, and it's one of those pictures that just pops in my mind every now and again. And it's just, damn it, that pickle tree.
Yeah.
So that's just one of those things you see out and about in life that, you know, just pops in your head and is eventually going to be something you'll do something with.
Yeah, and those things they are gifts, you know, like whether it's just like to provide you like a moment to like, you know, smile and sort of laugh to yourself.
Because it's the only tree I've ever seen look like a pickle.
Yeah.
And I smile about it every time I drive by. I cannot hide my joy of the pickle-shaped tree. It just does not happen. So what influences are you working with or working around right now in the whatever body of work you're working on?
Yeah. So this past spring, I finished 3 largish paintings. They're about 6.5 by 7 foot. And right now they're at a gallery in Greece called Rarity Gallery, part of their summer exhibition. And for those particular paintings, I was using images of flowers and trees and plants, a sort of heavily sort of organic sort of wall of imagery. But it was also interrupted with things that were like reflections or like lens flares and stuff like that. And also, I was working from pretty grainy photographs, and so I introduced some sort of harder edges where there weren't some hard edges. So it made the organic forms feel more crystalline and faceted. And, you know, that imagery that I'm working with there, it's a lot more, you know, it feels downright Baroque compared to like those more simple images that I was making in my early years when I was in New York or just out of graduate school. But been incredibly interested or compelled to try and wrestle with making these more complex images that have this sort of sense of layering. I think we all, it's like I can watch a documentary about, a forest or a national park or something like that, but there's a weirdness that at the same time, like there's maybe a reflection of the trees outside my house that are reflected on the TV screen.
Yeah.
And I could just step outside. And so there's that weird sort of tension. Every Mac OS system seems to be named after like a national park or a natural feature or an animal. So like even the apple on the back of the computer screen. And so there's all these references to nature, and like what is our humanity and the technologies that we use, how do they influence that? And so that's something I just keep running into in terms of these images I'm making. So I'm trying to make them more complex, using ideas from like grids and weaving as a sort of older technology. But then these digital artifacts and even just if you think about the prevalence of the technology of something as simple as glass.
Oh, man. Glass is amazing.
It protects us from the elements. It's on the screens of our computers and our phones.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere. It's
on my face. It's on your face.
Yep.
It kept me from the wind on my way here in my car.
Yeah. But it's made out of just like superheated sand. And so sand, like dirt, just simple elemental things that we take for granted. They go into making those technologies that help us, but also, they throw us some curveballs in terms of being human beings, and maybe sometimes make us less human, sometimes more human. And so it's like that sort of difficult sort of wrestling that we have to do as people. I think that's at the core of what I want to do with these paintings, is like sort of investigate and play with that territory of like, should I have my hands in the dirt or should I be watching a video of my hands in the dirt? And what's the difference there?
I'm really glad you made that statement because that leads to a question I wanted to ask. The digital artifacts or the intentional visual separation or juxtaposition of observing through or via a screen, do you use that in a divisive manner sometimes? Because it looks to be, what I've seen of your work, to be complementary to the ethos of whatever you're working on. But do you ever use that in a way that isn't complementary?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
Because specifically, the piece where you were talking about, in one of the pieces of media you sent me, you were talking about the reflection of the interior of the room with the view of the trees outside and how that was smashed together on one plane of the glass and how you enjoyed that juxtaposition. So that made me ask this question.
Yeah. I think, that idea of the painting surface acting like the plane of glass, where all this information is compressed together, outside, inside, your reflection, the natural world that you see outside, maybe a house plant inside, the fluorescent lights in the space, like that all becomes, smashed into one surface. For me, there is a tendency to look for that which is seductive, but also within that, sort of beauty or seduction, there should be some things that give us pause. When we see a ghost of our reflection in it, that can be read different ways. It can be about our own passing, sort of like the, time moving on, but it can also be about maybe a sort of distancing effect. And so I think within that sort of, whether it's beauty or seductive, sort of color and form, that there's also can be a distancing that happens. but I'm also making these things that are paintings, so they're handled objects.
Right.
Some of them look like they are digital images when you just sort of view them as a JPEG. But when you see them in real life, there's brush hairs and fingerprints that may be left behind and things
Always
like
on
that.
accident.
Yeah. Little like chunks of paint. But for me, it's like I want to make a complicated image.
Yeah.
That is, I have my technology. I use it, but there's also, like anything, things used too much or that become too important to us. We start worshiping them or putting our faith in them, and that should be cautionary as well.
I agree.
Yeah.
Being comfortable.
Yeah.
Is too good.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy the juxtaposition that you seem to play with between this digital 1 degree removed point of view and the more natural things you have subsequently behind that. Do you ever, what style do you say your work is? Because to me it seems it's more surrealist than anything else, and I feel like that is a really broad umbrella term for a lot of stuff. But if you have what seems to be tangible elements like your shadow or the reflection of, man-made light in a piece of yours, then that's your touchstone. That's the tangible thing and are familiar with, and then beyond that is everything else.
Yeah. So where would I place myself?
Yeah. If we're practicing the use of labels in this context, how would you describe it?
No. Yeah. Labels are helpful to like sort of get us into the ballpark.
Yeah.
It's funny. As a college student, I thought of myself as really working figuratively, and then working abstractly for like 15 years, sort of from grad school on. Pretty well thought of myself as an abstract painter, but sort of always drawing from those little bits of handwriting, those artifacts I'm finding in the world. But also really at the same time really aware of like the human presence in relationship to that. So maybe that's where the figure went at that point. And I'd say about 6 or 7 years ago, I just started thinking about specifically the camera and technology, and how it sort of how it changed our view or perception of the world around us. And sort of reshaping that happens with that. So where would I classify myself?
Which isn't a question I can remember asking other people, because I try not to play with labels too much. But
I think it's helpful. For me, I try and keep it open. So when we're in my studio, there's paintings that are, if you look at them, you're like, oh, he's an abstract painter. There's other paintings where it's like there's a flower as like a prominent motif or image within it. And you're like, oh, he's a representational painter. And I think very much that idea, that sort of handwriting of humankind, is still the sort of operating motif, that it might be taking something from the built environment. It's like looking at a office space that has a view out towards the gardens outside. Right. Everything there, from the, how the garden is set up and the well manicured lawn. And then also that glass that everything is reflected on. So it's sort of really compiling a lot of those marks of humankind into that compressed image there. And also, I think that idea of that sort of longing is still important to it. So, a flower, that can be a mark of longing.
Yeah.
Do you give that to someone you love, or do you send flowers when someone dies? It's a way of sort of expressing sort of sentiment and connection and care. But also that plane of glass, it's a thing that can enable us to see better. but it also can keep us from touching another person.
Yeah, I feel like it marks you as an observer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's a physical or implied physical barrier between you and whatever it is on the other side.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
How aware of that are you when you do these pieces?
For me, it's part and parcel to it.
Yeah.
You know, like that glass, which seems so sort of like duh, that it has, you know, that sort of metaphorical sort of power, but also actual power, that it can, you know, help us with so many things, technological, medicine, whatever it may be. But then, you know, it can be also the thing that keeps us, you know, you think of people like, you know, during the pandemic with COVID, it's like, you know, loved ones saying goodbye either through like the touch of an iPad, or through like a window. And, you know, so it's there allowing it, but it's also separating at the same time. Yeah. So, you know, it's a gift, but a tragedy at the same time.
Because you can't touch.
Yeah.
You can't physically interact.
Yep.
Like this is all you get.
Yep.
This is going to make me think about glass for like the rest of the week. But that's good. I always enjoy finding the ways to turn normal things on their heads.
Oh, yeah.
That is a delight in being a creative person that I find every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
yeah.
tickles my fancy in such wonderful ways.
Yeah. You know, I've got, there's a couple of paintings. One painting that was gifted to the Knoxville Museum of Art. There's sort of two pairs of paintings, not paintings of pairs.
So it's 4 paintings?
No, I'm sorry. It's way too, I'm making this way too complicated.
Words.
It is, there's 2 paintings, and they're both images of a flower bouquet, but they're seen as sort of on a reflected surface. And so you have both the inside and outside spaces reflected there. So it's a complicated image, but you can pick out these floral sort of elements that are part of those paintings. And they're entitled, one is entitled The Technology of Dirt, and the other one's entitled The Technology of Dirt and Air. And, you know, the technology of dirt or dirt and air, like that could be a flower, that could be your laptop computer, or that could be you and me.
Yeah, that umbrella could encompass lots of things.
Yeah, like we're made out of dirt and stardust, you know? And so for me, it's like when that poetic possibility of a simple, stupid image, seemingly stupid image, sort of opens up to the cosmos, like that's exciting stuff.
Yeah, when you can take the keyhole view and then realize on the other side that it is so broad.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. So I haven't seen these pieces. So do you have any challenges in dealing with volumetric space with these pieces? Because if you're implying that you're a viewer and there's a space around you or in front of you or that you're peering through, is that a challenge?
It's a fun challenge. I mean, it's an old challenge of people who've painted and made the sort of, you know, any type of space. And it's like always the challenge of making things flat, but also open space.
Yeah.
To where, you know, it can switch on a dime. So you might concentrate on one moment in a painting and it seems to open up and sort of float towards you in terms of creating space. And then you might just move, your eye might just move over like a foot, and all of a sudden things flatten out, or it seems like it creates a really deep space.
Or you look at it from across the room and it seems totally different.
Yeah. You know, it seems to congeal into what seems like it's a photograph, but a pretty sort of abstract photograph.
Well, when you said the bouquet, but you're looking at the bouquet via a reflection, then space and volume are inherent in how you represent that reflection.
Yeah.
Because the distance from that plane is very important.
Yeah.
So I had to ask.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like my SD card's got about 20 more minutes on it, which is terribly convenient and inconvenient at the same time. So I will ask, what body of work are you toiling away with right now?
Yeah. There's a couple different things I'm getting ready for. I'm gonna. I'll tell you about a couple projects that I'm working on.
If you can disclose,
Yeah,
that'd be
yeah.
great.
So, in October, I'm doing a 2-person show with Brian Job, who's another Knoxville artist, and it's going to be in a library gallery at Covenant College down in Chattanooga. And Brian makes sculptures, and he uses found elements like cinder blocks and like sort of like mid-century tiles that he finds and steel plates. And he uses those sort of modular forms to create sort of constructions by stacking and arranging. And so for that show, Brian and I are going to take a look at a group of drawings that I made. And those drawings they're in that sort of play compost area of the studio, taking like magazine pages, and like covering them in white gesso, like acrylic paint, and then smashing them between layers of plastic painter's drop cloth and letting them dry, which gives them a really sort of like
texture,
weird sort of texture. It's like if you had a sheet of plastic sheeting that was laying on dirt for a long time with some weight on top of it. It sort of creates a texture like that, sort of like smooth, but then all of a sudden there's a valley to it.
Very dynamic.
And I've been like weaving some of those things together, like making paper weavings. And so we're just going to have a bunch of those drawings that I've made and arranged, not all at eye level in the gallery, but sort of some near the floor, some higher on the ceiling, some sort of grouped together and sort of,
it makes it more interactive for the space.
Yeah. And, for me, one thing that when I was talking to Brian about it, I was talking about Emily Dickinson's Gorgeous Nothings, which was like these little scraps of paper, like sort of torn and folded bits of envelope that she would keep in her apron. And she would write down notes to herself or little bits of verse. And so I think of those drawings as like the sort of Gorgeous Nothings. They take me back to that experience of seeing Esther draw, but then they also have some of the concerns I'm working with right now in them. Another project in November, I'm gonna do another 2-person show in Chattanooga. So there's a lot of Chattanooga coming up, and that's with Heather Hartman, and that's going to be at a space called Channel to Channel. And that Heather is going to show these really elegant paintings that she's working on. And I've got a group of sort of modestly scaled paintings that are going to be part of that as well.
Modestly scaled, please elaborate.
They're like 16 by 12 inches, maybe 18 by 24.
Okay, so like, definitely on the smaller end.
On the smaller, smaller end. But I think it's gonna. We had a Zoom discussion last week and talked with Dustin, who is the director of Channel to Channel. So that we're super excited about that. And then I'm going to do a solo show in spring 2023 in April at White Space, which is a gallery down in Atlanta. So super excited about that.
So you're busy.
I need to get cracking in the studio.
All right. So 2 more questions.
Yes.
The one I like the most out of all the questions I ask is, what's a good creative day look like for you?
A good creative day usually entails a cup of coffee with Christine after we've got the kid. Well, actually, we wake up and have a cup of coffee before the kids get up.
That moment of peace before the chaos.
Yeah, before air traffic control kicks in. And then, after we get the kids situated and off to school, I'll go into my studio, and I usually give myself like 20 minutes, a half hour, just to do a little like reading, just sort of like checking in with what I need to do for the day. And then, I might need to do a little emailing and stuff like that. Sometimes, it's an hour or so or more. But then, pick up the brush and start working on paintings. There's always the thing where you have to sort of trick yourself into getting into motion and making things. So it's super helpful if I have a sort of half finished task like I'm trying to paint in a grid for the next painting. Well, if I can leave that sort of half completed and I know that I need to tape off some areas and paint, like that'll get me started. Then I've got some paint on my palette and I'll be like, oh, well, I've got this painting over here that needs some attention. And, before you know it, I've like tricked myself out of the sort of natural state of inaction into
so you
action.
went from writing emails to, oh man, I've worked on 4 pieces today.
Yeah. I mean,
hours.
It feels really good, if you're like hitting noon and you've gotten like, 3 or 4 hours in the studio already. And you've got more time, in the afternoon as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That is not every day,
No,
but that feels like a really good day.
Well, the really good creative days for me are the ones where I can wake up and just instantly wake up and like, maybe drink a glass of water, walk around the house, scratch my face, like wake up, and then immediately sit down at my desk and work until I'm thirsty or hungry or have a headache or, like, oh, I'm human. I need to go like service my body and keep myself alive. And then, it's like 2 p.m. and I can go about my day if I need to operate in society. So I've got all that done. Anything else I can do in the evening after that's, cherry on top.
Oh yeah, totally.
That's great. And then the last question I generally like to ask people, because I don't know everyone, is who would you like to hear otherwise on the podcast?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
So if you were to listen to this in your free time, who would you like to listen to?
Oh, wow. Man, there's lots of great people. I'm just going to throw out several names. There's, I've got lots of talented colleagues at UT. People like Mary Lauby and Althea Murphy-Price, and Ruben Skanov and Joshua Bianco, and like the list goes on. But there's also, people like Ashley Capps, who's brought Big Ears to Knoxville.
He was on South of Scruffy recently with Jim Fields, and that was a good episode.
Yeah. Who else? There's some of the people like Sarah Swinford, who's working with Log Haven, which is an artist residency that's really gotten going here in Knoxville. I love Knoxville that I feel like I could come up with a list of about 50 names.
Well, you've already given me more than most people give me, so that's fine.
I watch out. There'll be a follow-up email with 30 more names.
That'll keep me running, so that's fine.
Yeah. Oh, Lisa Zinni at the Knox County Arts and Culture Alliance.
Okay.
She is hilarious, and she is such a great advocate for the arts.
Yeah, I definitely want to reach out to that bit of town culture and see what's up there.
Yeah. She's completely down to earth, and you will laugh. So she's awesome.
I might have to have her across the table.
Yeah.
I didn't ask you at the top of the show to tell people where they can find your stuff. So if you want to plug your socials and your website and all that jazz, go right ahead.
Yeah. So my name is Jered Sprecher, and probably the most complicated Google aspect of that is Sprecher, which is Sprecher. And I've got a website, which is jeredsprecher.com, and I am on Facebook and Instagram, just Jered Sprecher on the old Instagram. And I'm also faculty at UT, so it can be reached through that system as well. But there's a contact on my website and all that. So, yeah.
Well, excellent. We're sitting at an hour and 3 3/4 minutes right now. I appreciate your time, your willingness, and enthusiasm to sit here and have this glorious conversation with me. Everybody, that has been another episode of the KAAMP. If you wish to support the show, you can keep listening to it. You can put it in your ear holes like I constantly request. You can put it in your friends' ear holes. Take over the aux cord in the car and just turn on the podcast because you don't give a damn. You can buy my art. The artwork is under a different name now because somebody hacked my old Instagram account. Damn it. It is TTW Artworks with an underscore in between, I think, on Instagram. You can contact me there. You can find me on Facebook under the same, The Twisted Wrist. You can find me on Facebook as Thomas Zachary. I also post a lot of art stuff on my personal outlets. You can share the stuff about the show and do all that jazz. And, you know, if you just feel so inclined, you can throw money at me in the streets, and I promise it'll go to a good cause. And that would be the podcast. Everybody, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a good day, and I'll chat at you next time.